yours.
Hello, Antoine. Thank you. And welcome everybody to this afternoon session. We had an interesting session this morning, and it was commented during the introduction of the winter days that we want to know how to build data spaces. And this session has this purpose. Here we have amazing presenters to show us how to build these data spaces, sharing experience. And the first speaker and moderator of this session is Douwe Lycklama. Everybody knows Douwe. It's a real pleasure to have Douwe moderating this session here with us. I think I cannot see him, so we need to wait a couple of minutes. So in this session, we will have also then Juanjo explaining their experience in implementing building blocks in I4Trust projects. And then Gerard from iSHARE will explain an example of data sharing spaces. And finally, Dennis Weber. So we have Douwe here to moderate this session. Thank you, Douwe, for joining. Douwe is a founding member of INNOPAY, an amazing data space initiative in Netherlands. He is also promoting several initiatives in data spaces in Europe, such as Data Sharing Coalition, Data Spaces Now. And thank you, Douwe, for joining. It's a pleasure to work with you. And also, Douwe was involved in the design principles position paper writing as editor and main contributor. So the floor is yours, Douwe, please.
Thank you, Silvia. Thank you for indeed reminding of the paper on data spaces already more than a year ago. But I must say, I look it up regularly. And I'm going to also use a few of those concepts in my presentation. Thanks everybody for joining this session. And with, well, the five of us are really focusing on practical realities of data spaces, because we hear a lot about, of course, the bigger concepts. But at the end of the day, we need to bring it into practice. Let me also, I also brought some slides, so I'm going to share my screen as well. It is shared now. I will start my... Can everybody see my screen now?
Yeah, in presentation mode. Perfect.
All right, yeah, so the point is there are no data spaces without users and their cases. We often hear the word use case, but it's a serious message, I think, of this session, is that at the end of the day, it's about use cases, but it's about the way we do these use cases and the few principles we apply to those use cases in order to preserve the vision of the data sovereignty and the interoperability. And after so many years of data spaces, we see that data spaces is an inspiring concept. On a high level, creates quite some enthusiasm. But if you bring it down to reality, it means many things to many people, which is good and practical as long as we realize this going forward. Here is the mentioned report, because in this document we really, I think, succeeded in with quite a group of experts to nail down the key concepts of data spaces, which is about data sovereignty, about data spaces, and of course users. And it's for users and their use cases. We are all doing this. And a user is a person as a citizen, but often also as a user on behalf of a company, who is then in charge of data and who has through data spaces will have secure, transparent, trusted, easy access to data in a unified fashion. And unified is important, is that we sort of develop a way on how we treat data. It's a bit similar to we found over the years a way to do telephone calls or to send a message or to do a payment in a store that's sort of standardized all over the planet. But the way we share data for users is still not unified and standardized. And I think this is what data spaces can bring us and will bring us. And it's still gonna take some time. But if we take every day little steps, then finally we will get there. So the core concept is, of course, data sovereignty, and data sovereignty translates back to functionality for users, say use cases. And we have here some categorizations and some examples of use cases. We see consumer use cases, we see business use cases, and public use cases. And even more specific, it's about functionality for people, a use case. And in the end, data spaces facilitate functionality. So in the consumer area, you can think of, indeed, in the social media world, of being friends with other people on other platforms without you realizing it. It's a bit similar that you can call anyone without realizing with which telephone company they are. In the industrial world, we know plenty of examples also through the great work of IDSA. And in the public world, there is also more and more interest, and we will show also some examples of that. But it all boils down on reuse of data and being able to give access to data to trusted other parties. So data spaces. I would like to make the point here that data spaces are of a fractal nature. That means that they look the same on every level of abstraction. And a data space is a collection of use cases. And so I try to depict this with a mathematical symbol, the summation symbol, in which a data space is just a bunch of users who interoperate and who have an easier, unified way to trust each other and to share data for a certain purpose, and which brings a certain value in terms of business or in ease of use. And so the world I see happening is that we'll have data spaces, we have use cases, we'll have overlaps, and you can even see groups of data spaces becoming new data spaces. You can have situational data spaces. It's all like a bird swarm in the end. A data space is not a fixed thing. And this is all, again, based on sort of practical challenges we see every day on really creating value for users in data spaces. Then there is the idea of data sovereignty, and also data sovereignty is not a fixed in stone concept when you have to implement it, and it has I here want to make create the awareness that there is a very technical perspective of data sovereignty, and there's also a legal perspective. And in the technical perspective, there is also a lot of spectrum there as well. You can have sharing data, plain data, but you can also have the more secure, if there are more secure requirements, then you talk about edge computing, and only the results leave or only the results are being shared, and that computations are done somewhere else. But it's all data sovereignty. And then, of course, there is the whole legal side, where when data is shared, is to connect the data right holders to the data being shared, and then it becomes, then the technology is sort of instrumental for creating a legal reality of data sharing. So data sovereignty can also be created with a more procedural and legal way in my experience, and you will see in some use cases. But it can also be created by strong technical means, and it's all data sovereignty, and it all fits into the overall IDS architecture. But in practice, there is a whole spectrum of choices to be made, and that is where the success will be for realizing all these numerous use cases, which over time create a mushrooming world of data spaces. So as said, implementing it is a spectrum, and it has to do with the risk context of data spaces. So if you have requirements of data spaces which have high risk, then you will put up a lot of technical and maybe legal procedures in place where there is if you have data spaces which are of a less risk, but then implementation is easier, and there is a distribution in numbers, and that in practice you see a high number of lower risk use cases versus a lower number of high risk use cases, and we as technical people tend to focus very much on the complex and the high stuff because we find that interesting, but there are also a lot of easier use cases, and that will also drive a big part of the adoption, and will be easier to implement for companies and people. So one way we are pioneering this is in the data sharing coalition. It is an initiative funded by the ministry in the Netherlands, and it's comprising of a whole group of organizations, including also IDSA. And I believe the little map of the Netherlands can easily be replaced over time by the map of Europe, or starting with Germany. But here you see also the whole vision behind this is that it is a summation of use cases, and that but while developing the use case, if you have the eye for the interoperability and the data sovereignty, which is depicted in these pictures, then we are heading in the right direction. I don't believe that the data space is something we can engineer from top down. It will have to grow from bottom up if you want to create a sustainable adoption of data sharing uses. So examples of those use cases in which is in this ecosystem being explored for the last 2 years and also for the years to come. There are here a few. It can be about agriculture and also human trafficking and data sharing in logistics. That is, and you see here some the focus here is a lot on this cross-sectoral data sharing. And one of the examples to highlight here as the last part of my contribution is the one on the green loans, which is a very use case, very topical on the transition of energy, and is that people can have favorable financing conditions if they want to invest in transition investments. And they will receive those favorable conditions if they share data from their smart meter towards their bank. And so for that, a data sharing use case was organized, and that has also required to go through all these different blocks of the data sharing challenges, but most of them were very easily solved because there were only 2 main actors which had to make some agreements. But the most complex one was the identity and access management. So the mechanism to really create the sovereignty for the consumer, who had to authorize every time an access to the smart meter data, but only for that specific purpose, for a specific duration, and that it is a very practical use case. And this was all the results of this were documented, and this was a very particular one where there is a user behind the screen, but it's just an example of that it is possible to create bottom-up use cases and still having the data sovereignty and also the decentralized data sharing. I leave it at here, and I invite the rest of my distinguished panel also to highlight the practical realities of data sharing. And so you will hear more from Juanjo, Gerard, and Dennis. And so I would like to pass on to Juanjo to take us along in your practical use case considerations.
Okay, thank you, Douwe. Let me share the screen. I guess I can do this way. Please confirm if you can see my screen.
Yes, we see you.
Now presentation, full presentation mode. So yes, well, this session is about making data space happen, because we want them to be here, and Douwe has already introduced this white paper, the design principles for data spaces. Many of us contributed to that white paper, and I think has become a reference and a guidance on this. But one of the first message and concepts I want to introduce is that of making it clear that creating data spaces means making choices. And actually, if we want to make and materialize this vision and have data spaces emerging in Europe, we really need to be very, very careful making those choices. I'm FIWARE, and in our DNA, what we have as that of making things happen. What we did was to start a project called I for Trust, which is actually about making those choices and bring something tangible that companies and the architects and developers in those companies can really use to create those data spaces we are talking about. We have a number of building blocks to materialize, technical building blocks on one side, governance building blocks on the other. Regarding technical building blocks, a number of building blocks that have to do with data interoperability, how to really make effective the exchange among participants of a data space. Of course, building blocks that have to do with how to preserve data sovereignty and trust, but also equally important, if we look towards sustainability of the whole thing, building blocks for data value creation. And what we did in I for Trust is we bring together technologies coming from FIWARE, coming from iSHARE, and Gerard may probably elaborate more about what they are bringing in this project. We were bringing all this together to create a complete and comprehensive framework. That meant, as I said, making choices. So the kind of I for Trust framework we are bringing is about making those choices, and is, for instance, about making decisions. What is the language that participants of the data spaces are going to be using? Those participants in I for Trust based data spaces, and talking about that same language means choosing a concrete data exchange API, because that is the kind of sentences those participants are able to construct. Is about creating data models, because they have to be able to speak about the same things. And last but not least, common mechanisms for identity and access management. And these are three key elements that about which we have made some choices in I for Trust. Concretely, about what data exchange API is being used, we have gone for an approach where participants of data spaces in I for Trust are exchanging data about digital twins. Each organization is expected to have a smart solution running, which already leverage on the concept of digital twins, and those participants, what they are doing is exchanging data about digital twins, the digital twin data that brings a representation of the real world all the participants share. Regarding identity and access management framework, we are bringing together, following iSHARE specs, and a complete set of open source components. We evolved some of our components in FIWARE to align with iSHARE specifications. We also rely on global services like the one from iSHARE satellite to bring the concept of trust anchor. But last but not least, we also incorporate advanced concepts like data marketplaces, publication services, again, aligning with the standards like TM4 APIs, and when we talk about data publication, DCAT and DCAT AP, which are well recognized W3C standards. This is a bit, again, this taxonomy of building blocks, where I will not go into the details, but there are these concrete choices in each of the boxes about concrete standards we are following, and some of them already in place in the existing iForTrust framework, others in the roadmap. Very briefly, perhaps regarding data exchange API, NGS-ILD, the ETSI standard as a basis for exchanging digital twin information regarding data models, adopting those that have been defined in the Smart Data Models Initiative, and contributing to that large library of resources, data models to grow. Regarding sovereignty and trust, relying on state-of-the-art standards like OpenID Connect, but going to implement in the short term the support to distributed identifiers, verified credential presentations, and of course relying on stable state-of-the-art concepts like eIDAS, and relying on iSHARE satellite services, and for the data value creation, the standards I was referring before. We are going to evolve all this in a second step to support also the integration with blockchain networks. That is going to play a fundamental role in data spaces for logging information and make sure that you can have an audit proof of different transactions within the data space. That is something we expect to have available first half of this year. We launched an open call within iForTrust, and we are proud to share with you that the first experiments using this framework, it is a tangible framework you can start using for creating data spaces, that are starting these days. The kickoff of these experiments was end of January. We have 13 experiments with 73 SMEs already involved. So we are talking about an ecosystem that is starting to emerge. So real, concrete, tangible things covering 6 domains: smart agri-food, cities, energy, smart environment, smart logistics, smart ports, and companies all over 14 countries in Europe. So quite a nice footprint and coverage all around Europe. We cannot go through all the details, but I think it's interesting to see how smart agri-food, smart logistics were 2 domains that really brought a good number of experiments, and this is quite encouraging because these are 2 areas where we will be able to bring the first clear examples of data spaces, not just solving one process, but really solving quite a number of processes. And one of the things we are envisioning in the program is that of making those experiments actually start also sharing information about them. Here you have the link to dive into the details of those experiments, and I wanted to point out that there will be a second open call to be launched in May. Well, how this fits also with things like what has been defined in IDS through several years now. Some of you have already know that BDBA, FIWARE, GAIA-X, IDSA, we launched together the Data Space Business Alliance last September with the intent of having one voice and a common framework for interoperable data spaces. And this is one of the things we are currently driving is we are putting in place an implementation-driven plan towards trying to align and create a convergency from a technical standpoint. And this idea would be that of evolving through different stages starting with things that are complete and already available, like I4Trust, but incorporating new and new functionality. We have, as I explained before, the plans for incorporating verified credential presentations and evolve the existing trust anchor, but we will start discussions how to integrate IDS connector technology, ODRL, that is also quite a nice results coming from all these years in IDS, and looking also with the to discuss the integration of marketplace concepts together with some of the Gaia X federated catalog concepts and so on. Last slide is just to bring a summary and some ideas about next steps. Well, I4Trust was created to accelerate materialization of data spaces, as I said, making choices, and but now is available there for being used to create data spaces. And some first set of experiments are already in place. We are incorporating the verified credentials and presentations technologies within the already existing identity and access management framework. And as part of the roadmap moving forward, we are going to start the discussion how to bring IDS connector functionality within the framework, how to integrate Gaia X concepts, and we hope this will be instrumental in achieving the technology convergency that is one of the missions and goals with which this Data Space Business Alliance was created. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer questions afterwards. Thanks.
Thank you, Juanjo, for your contribution right now and also over the years in convergence and collaboration and yeah, making it all very practical. For now, I would like to move on to Gerard, but we don't see Gerard. Oh, you're there. Okay, you're on a different place.
Yeah,
you're back.
You do, but I'm just behind the other camera. So thanks, Douwe.
In your studio, yeah. Go ahead, Gerard.
Indeed, in the studio in Rotterdam. Thanks for introduction, Douwe, and great to be in this line of speakers, especially after Juanjo, where he shared what we do together with FIWARE in driving I4Trust and in building those data spaces and make those data spaces a reality with the components that are out there already. And I want to connect to what Douwe said in the beginning. It's not about technology, it's about users and user stories. And that's where I wanted to share a few things that we're doing with the iSHARE Foundation and how we collaborate with IDS, with Gaia, with FIWARE, and many others in the industry with the components that we bring. Because there's still challenges in the whole data space game, and we're still in the beginning. But I think it's crucial to understand that technology and legal are definitely going hand in hand when it comes to trust and data sovereignty. And that's where iSHARE has been playing a role since the foundation started back in 2015 in the logistics industry and slowly developed further, where iSHARE helps in building trust and being a trust anchor within a data space. So to go a bit deeper into that, there are a few areas that iSHARE brings in this whole puzzle and in all the choices, like Juanjo said, of when you're building a data space. First of all, iSHARE brings the legal framework, basically a general NDA, which is general for all participants in the data space and within the bigger area, because it's not a single data space. Data spaces are much bigger and are overlapping and connecting. So organizations are usually part of multiple data spaces, and by using a single legal framework, it's really helping to make it easier to communicate. But then for specific data spaces, specific legal is still needed. So that's where iSHARE and the iSHARE satellites allow you as a data space to have that trust anchor and to have digitally verifiable whether there's legal coverage in collaboration with an organization. Well, jumping forward into the authorization bit, knowing that you know who's in the data space, you can actually, based on the IDAS, authorize others to actually use your data and access your data, even if it's in other cloud locations and in other spaces. So that is what we're doing, and I don't have to repeat that, with iForTrust together with FIWARE, and bringing those building blocks available to actual applications and make it super tangible. So there's a lot of content also on the iForTrust website to actually make it real and implement it. Because it's indeed about the choices of what building blocks are you actually going to use. And in line with Juanjo's story, that's where FIWARE and iSHARE bring a few components together. But what I really wanted to talk about now is to make it real, make it tangible. How does it work, and how do you make something to reality? And I wanted to share a use case which is, funnily enough, pretty close to the use case that also Douwe shared within the energy space, but then on the business side. The Dutch institute, the Rijksdienst voor Ondernemend Nederland, which is part of the Ministry of Economic Affairs, is monitoring how the Netherlands is doing when it comes to the climate agreement, Paris Agreement. But instead of going old-style reporting, they're going data space. Instead of sending all organizations in the Netherlands a request, hey, can you do a monthly report on where you go with your energy consumption? They're going, hey, let's request an authorization on the existing data, because energy consumption data of businesses, which is super sensitive, is already out there with the energy providers, the grid operators, and in the Netherlands specifically with EDSM. By getting authorizations, specific authorizations on receiving that data or collecting that data, reports of the entirety of the Netherlands will be generated in a data spaces session. And I think this is a great example how that actually works, where we use, of course, iSHARE components, data standards that are out there for energy consumption, and a simple way of discovery where also the iSHARE satellites play a crucial role. So this sounds all amazing and super cool, but the question, of course, is how does that really work? So I wanted to take you through a quick step-by-step animation, how that is actually working, and how parties are collaborating with the use of those components. Because, well, on the left you see the data consumer, which is the ministry wanting to have data, and usually have the tendency to send emails or send letters to all those organizations. Now within this data space, this application, which is totally federated, there's no central body, there is the use of the iSHARE satellite, which is just the iSHARE authority, totally run by an independent organization under the iSHARE specifications. Within that satellite, the information is available of all the participants. So the data owner is registered in this data space, and the pointers to where his data is are available in the iSHARE network. So ministry asks, hey, where is that the information of that organization? Gets a pointer to his marketplace, maybe, but in this case, it's directly pointing to the data service provider, which is EDSM. EDSM checks again in the network, is this a trusted party? Can I really collaborate with this organization? Are they legally covered for that interaction? That's again checked in the iSHARE network. And as a next step is, hey, where are the authorizations of this specific data owner? Because I want to make sure, and it's not even making sure, I'm only allowed to share data if there's an explicit authorization for this organization to share his data to the ministry. So next step is checking against that role, that authorization registry, which is again an independent role in the data space, where is checked, hey, is there an authorization available? And that's where well, the cool part starts. Usually the structure is, hey, let's have predefined policies. But in this structure, at the moment, how we are realizing that, it's going to be generated on behalf of a request. So as soon as there's a request from a data consumer, the data owner gets the message, do you want to give an authorization to the ministry? And at that moment, the policy is actually generated. So that flow then leads to a real authorization and actual sharing of data. Totally in line with, well, the European Data Governance Act when it comes to data sovereignty and data control, in line with the directions of Gaia and the principles of IDS, with ready components. So all those components are out there already. This is in production. And the great part is that RVO, so the ministry, will start to collect and get requests out to 1.5 million organizations, which will onboard in the iSHARE network in the coming years, which of course gives a great foundation, not only for the Dutch market, but we're working on similar use cases also internationally, where other organizations take up that iSHARE satellite role and onboard participants in a similar fashion, in a trusted structure based on the IDAS and IDS principles. So I would say it's a great example how we have a scaling use case that is really going well, and it's not the only example. There are many other examples that I'd love to share at a later stage. But this is reality. This is how we bring value with data spaces already, because now all those organizations, all those data owners don't have to do any reporting, but they control who is accessing their data and when that's happening. So maybe you want to get some more information, just can drop me a note, in email, or check out iShare.eu. And on that ending, Douwe, back to you.
Yeah.
Maybe there are any questions. So
yeah, we're going to save the questions for last. I think we are well on schedule, so thank you both for that. And hereby I put additional pressure on Dennis from Advaneo to do the same, but we're good. I mean, yeah, we saw good examples of very practical stuff. I also know Dennis is also coming with practical from the practical world. He's from Advaneo. Advaneo is a long-standing member of IDSA, and they really walk the talk with all their tech and solutions. And I'm very happy that Dennis could join well, last week actually in our session to also share his experience, his views on how to bring this to life in practice. So Dennis, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Douwe. I do hope that you can see my screen now. Just a quick confirmation. Perfect, thank you. Yes, you're absolutely right. And actually that already came to my mind when I heard your presentations now for the first time, like completely. We do actually fit very nicely into this whole topic of Advaneo, but we are taking a little bit of a different approach, or have a different viewing point of this angle of building blocks and what does that mean. Oops, one click too fast. So yeah, I just start with basically my script from here a little bit. So during the next 10 minutes, I want to tell you a little bit about what we do at Advaneo, why that fits perfectly to the topic of this session, and of course, provide you with a real use case that we are working on out of our research project called PERS, but more on that later. Once again, if at any time during this presentation questions or remarks arise, I encourage you to use the chat, or later even use that nice little blue button and maybe get on stage with us. So far, so good. Okay, so who are we? Why are we here? Advaneo is based in Düsseldorf, Germany, and started out with a focus on the topic of digital transformation. And we are mostly here because we are an active member of the IDSA since 2016. And since then, actually, we have started building solutions on the principle of sovereign data sharing. as you can imagine, during these 7 years, we have gathered a lot of experience in these areas. For example, we started up the data marketplace, so we actually know our way around sovereign secure data monetization. The whole topic of sovereign data sharing and data spaces in general really grew on us during the last years. So this technical experience combined with the feedback that we have gotten from our partners and customers that led us to our current key offerings. To save some time, I will focus on the most important one today, what we call our building blocks, which provide the infrastructure for you to build up your own individual data space. And that fits really nicely into what we've heard so far, because a data space is always your own individual solution. So it requires your work to make it yours. It's not one size fits all, at least not today. So as an introduction, I will give you a small overview of these building blocks and the way they interact. Just a quick notice, this will be the longest slide, so please bear with me a little bit. We start out with you as the users of our planned data space. From here, information and data will flow into a module that we would call the data catalog. That one manages the incoming data in an automated way, like tagging and cleaning and this kind of stuff. And of course, this module is highly individual in its form and function to the actual use case. So after that, the processing of the data will flow into our instance of our data marketplace module. Here, regulated access to all data assets in the ecosystem will be managed, and thus sovereign data sharing is actually provided. You know, in the IDS ecosystem, this is the role of the broker, but here we also have functionalities, like really core functionalities of the IDS already implemented, like usage control, ident management, or a clearinghouse. And of course, you can use it to monetize your data and process it in various ways as well. But what if you want to share your data to use it in a cooperative use case, but it's just too sensitive to open up to other parties? We've heard that need from our customers, from our partners, and we found out that there is no convenient solution for that in the near future. That's why we have developed our Trusted Data Hub to extend the current IDS solutions. Trusted Data Hub provides so-called privacy-preserving multi-party computation. It's a big buzzword, but it roughly just means that you can use your sensitive data in a collaborative project without ever revealing it. The raw data will not be revealed to the other parties. Only the results will be shared with all parties in the end. We heard that concept mentioned here as well, so we've built a solution to actually do it in a way other than, for example, federated learning. And of course, finally, in the middle of it all, potentially as the connecting piece, there's the connector. I probably don't have to explain to you the functionalities of a connector, so I'll just say that we are aware of all the different approaches and endeavors in that direction, and we will pick and customize the right connector for your use case. Or even do it without one if it's not strictly necessary in the first use case and just use parts of it. That always works out as well. To wrap up the Advaneo part of this presentation, I want to emphasize one thing. Our solutions already exist. So obviously, we do not offer a perfect one-size-fits-all click and buy package right now. This, like I said, this is individual for every use case. And this is right now considering the maturity level of IDSA or something like Gaia-X, it's just not realistic. But what we can do and offer is that we use the existing solutions and build basically a first MVP of your actual data space use case in about 3 months. And this is actually a nice transition to the use case that I want to present today, which we implement using these solutions that I've just presented to you. That use case would be PAIRS. PAIRS is part of PAIRS is a governmentally funded research project, and we as Advaneo are the consortial lead. It is short for Privacy Aware, Intelligent and Resilient Crisis Management. And in short, we want to develop a cross-domain data and service platform which helps businesses and political actors with the topic of risk and crisis management. We want to do this by using cross-domain data and AI services for detecting and modeling crisis scenarios, forecasting the consequences out of these scenarios for its actors, and then give recommended actions for the actual users. As you can imagine, when I say buzzwords like data platform, cross-domain, or business and public actors, that this screams for the concept of data space. So on the screen, you see right now, it's a rough visualization of what I have described earlier. Cross-domain data sources being used for crisis detection, scenario generation, and so on and so on. What's a little bit different or added here is the opaque area surrounding all of that, which has the labels of the IDSA as well as Gaia-X on each side. I think I can even point stuff here. That's very nice. This means that we do plan on gathering our services and data assets and whatever else we can find in this area under the banner of something that we will call the resilience data space and connect it to these ecosystems. So that is the actual plan right now, to build up the resilience data space and use it in IDSA and like in the IDSA ecosystem and connect it also to the Gaia-X infrastructure. Okay, next slide. Okay, here we are. So how do we plan to use our data space building blocks for that? That is depicted on this slide, which in the first glance looks very confusing. This is a very rough architecture overview, but I mainly want you to focus on the right side of the screen. So basically here, this is what I'm going to talk about. You can see that we have three main layers. On the first layer, on the interface or the data ingestion layer, we can use the connector as well as the data catalog. Like I said, it connects to data sources and then we can manage the input data. On the layer above that, the crisis management service layer, we will use the trusted data hub to enable the processing of even sensitive data. I will give you examples of what that will be in the next slides. And on the third layer, which is what the actual user will see, we can use our data marketplace to manage the access to these services as well as the use data assets. Give me the next slide. Yes. So how does that translate into the real world? Where do we start with pairs? Currently, we are focusing on three main areas. The first one being supply chain management for production or manufacturing. The second one is health, and the third one is energy. For each of these, we are currently working out the specific details of the use cases, which leverage crisis management to increase the resilience of the participating parties. And of course, we are always open for new input and further interesting ideas for use cases from your side. So if you're interested in anything like that, in the end, there will be contact details. I'm also available on this platform, just FYI already. Next slide. Okay. But to keep this presentation a little bit in the limits of this time frame, just focus on one use case right now, the supply chain management for the manufacturing companies. The goal is easy to define and not really new. I'm just thinking here about projects like the Smart Connected Supplier Network by TNO or Smart Factory Web by the Fraunhofer IOSB, just to name a few, both of which we don't want to compete against, but basically just to build on and cooperate with in the future. So what we want to do is increase the resilience of manufacturing companies by ensuring a stable supply of raw materials and goods, or in other words, by making the supply chain resilient. One main way to do so is by making the process more transparent. But of course, that is difficult, as the data required for that is manifold and sensitive on a lot of levels. Not even speaking of the vast amount of different parties which would have to be connected. That is also why you will probably hear that if you are in that topic as well, we go away from the term supply chain and more to the term of supply network, because in the end, that is what it is. So then again, it screams for something like a data space, right? So that is also our solution. Our solution for that is to use the sovereign data sharing approach of data spaces to build up that network on its own, basically. And just a quick insight to circumvent the cold start problem, where we start with a bottleneck analysis of your production, identify critical areas in your supply chain, and then use DPS services for early crisis detection and recommending actions. In that way, make your supply chain a little bit more resilient, even though we don't know all of its actors and have access to all of their parties right away. And as usual in such a research project, we are obviously not doing this alone. Currently, our consortium consists of 23 partners, combining the skills and knowledges of very different backgrounds and industries. We are, as you can see on the slide, this ranges from very big names like IBM, SIG, or PwC, over research institutes like FIWARE and Fraunhofer, up to small agile experts like T-Blue or Bisping, and obviously a lot more that I cannot name all at this moment. And then we are already at the obligatory last slide of such a presentation, my call to action. Be part of it. If you're interested in what we do with Paris, don't hesitate to contact me, anyone at Advaneo basically, or visit our project website, which I have given on the right. Multiple contact information there. Or of course, if you've got inspired to build up your own sovereign data sharing use case, we are happy to talk to you about your ideas and find a way to make it possible with our data space building blocks. So yeah, let us know. And with that, thank you very much for your attention. And that would be it from my side. I guess we are open for discussion now, right?
Yes, thank you, Dennis. Yeah, going from supply chains to supply networks, that is an interesting remarks which gives some echo, and also the one from Juanjo. Data spaces is about making choices, but we'll get to that later. There was one question directly related to your presentation, Dennis. It's from Ute Brunner. Maybe you see it in the chat. If you never share your data, how do you ensure trust in your data products? It was probably triggered by your MPC remarks.
Yes. So you don't share your raw data, which does not mean that you don't open it up to other parties. That is the concept behind that, which in the end means obviously the algorithm that you build it on, it needs to be implemented on, let's say, sample data or whatever, or maybe by a trusting third party that has access to a little bit more data than you would put into the system. But what is important, it is not opened up to any one of your competitors, for example. Like in the supply chain, what is the biggest problem is that obviously you don't want to open up your production data to anyone who is maybe on the same tier of suppliers, or even further than basically your tier 1 suppliers and who is after you. But that would be needed. And basically with our system, it would be too much to explain it in detail now, but it ensures that you do not open up your raw data, but that the algorithm that it is run on is implemented on correct data.
So it's a mathematical and an encryption-driven solution, right? It's a very advanced technique. So it sounds like magic, but it's really true. I can also testify.
It sounds like AI. It's that big black box now. It's a combination of software and hardware where we say, okay, we want to build up the trust in the most ways that we can, but at some point the raw data and the algorithm, they have to be combined, obviously. And we do say we don't do it completely on the encrypted data, but the point where the algorithm and the actual raw data of the different parties get brought together, that is a completely sealed off server on its own that basically no one has access to put it like in really general holistic terms.
Yeah, okay. All right. Thanks for your reply. Going back to the remark of Juanjo, data spaces is about making choices, and maybe Gerard can start with this. Is in your, let's say, experience of the past years now, and thinking about the scope of choices you can make on data spaces, is there a certain hierarchy of topics on which in practice we make the most choices upon nowadays? And will it always be like this, or will it change in the future?
That's of course a great question, and I see Juanjo also moving. Okay, what is going to be the answer to that? I think one of the key aspects that's defining for everything is what is the key use case, and what is the nature of the data that you're actually going to exchange. Because the nature of the data, as in, is it confidential data, is it open data, is it licensable data, that defines for a large portion how you also design the bigger architecture and what choices you make in terms of sovereignty, in terms of authorization structures, or that you would go for a marketplace that is, well, within the criteria and the conditions is free to trade on, on data sets or data services. The major cases, and I think that is what we've seen so far, that the cases that actually drive the most adoption and have the biggest impact are cases with big data consumers that collect a lot of data, which is super classified. But by doing that, it's really driving massive use cases and learn. And I think that is a key item that, well, we've been discussing also with the Commission, how to, well, build up that understanding that it's crucial that you as an organization control your data that is already at cloud providers. I think that notion and bringing those cloud providers also on board is really driving the potential of new use cases. But then back to, the choices. There are many more choices, of course, in the 4 columns when it comes to the OpenDA model, where governance and having a structure in place to monitor and to manage what the structure is in the data space is key. And then, well, try to be as nimble as possible at the first stages. So we've seen use cases where, well, implementation of full standards was the first step, and it usually takes a long time, is not helping you to get to first value. So make it smaller, to make create a minimum viable version of your data space with a minimum set of functionality and scale from that.
Yeah, okay. That's again the bottom-up story there. Right, thanks. Juanjo, some additional thoughts on this? On the choices? You're muted.
Yeah. Really, the choices. What I think is also relevant, and I think it's one of the great values of the paper about data design concepts for data spaces is that you need to make the choices in each of these 4 pillars. It's not about, okay, I can just make some choices in one of them, and then this way we are going to have data spaces happening. You actually need to cover all these fronts. And I think this is one of the topics on which we really insist very much, because sometimes there have been only partial views about saying, okay, we only need to define a security framework, and with that, data spaces can emerge, or others that may be coming with the idea of, okay, we only need to come up with the standards for interoperability. No. So one message is we need to come with something that is complete in covering all these fronts, all these pillars, and that's very relevant. And the second idea is we need to bring use cases and more use cases. We need really stories to tell that can become like references and can guide the new use cases in their path and towards adoption.
Yeah. Okay. So it's really it's full scope, but the depth of every topic differs per use case. That's basically what you're saying. But you cannot have use cases in which you can ignore just a few aspects out of this grid. Right? I think that's a very important message. And Dennis, any other thoughts on that? I saw your big consortium, so you must have quite a complex governance, maybe, or a lot of attention on that topic.
Yeah, yes and no. This is once again with us really completely depending on use cases, and also depending, like that is why this is super interesting for us, on these regulation frameworks that are being worked out upon in, like, on IDSA, on the different endeavors that we've seen today. And our best approach is to always be aligned to that, because I also feel like these are growing with every use case that we can find, so they're super important. And this is the only step forward, small step forwards, and then basically we are going to implement it from the implementation side.
Yeah. Okay. Now then, I would like to conclude with the very important question from Lars. And I need short answers for that, because I see Antoine already also appearing in our session. That's a non-verbal sign that we have to speed up. Is that if you see the question of Lars, will we have certain minimum levels in choices there, or will we have a lot of endless variance and, well, in my words, sort of fragmentation and silos everywhere? That is a bit. So Gerard, some words on that.
Yeah, of course, from my perspective, there's going to be a bigger standard that is going to be used by multiple data spaces, because the real value is not only within the data space, it's really across data spaces, because organizations always work in multiple areas. So starting from a structure of that identity and that trust anchoring structure, combined with legal, I think is a key item. But on top of that, there's a lot of variations.
Okay, I see Dennis nodding at that as well. Okay.
Yes, I agree 100%.
Okay, and Juanjo, do you have an opposing opinion?
Well, in my opinion, precisely, if you leave many choices open is where then endless variants happen, and then there will be missing opportunities to really foster innovation and so on. I always put an example. Let's imagine if the World Wide Web has been defined so that the markup language being used when you publish a web page was optional. Why not? Let's allow different markup languages. Then the World Wide Web haven't exist as it is, simply, period. No. So therefore, we have to come with choices, as Lars has pointed out in the chat, is about creating, of course, that minimum number of choices, but that will certainly ensure the interoperability and the creation of this innovation. It's a trade-off. You cannot go too much, over-defining absolutely everything, but you really have to come with the minimum choices for each of the pillars and really go for it. It's cool. My honest opinion.
Yeah, so this is our task for the past years, but it will be for the coming years as well, is figuring this out.
If you allow me a last word, that is what we are trying to do in the Data Space Business Alliance, working together, the four initiatives, towards trying to agree what could be that minimum set of agreements.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Thank you, everyone, for this great panel, for your insights, your preparation, your enthusiasm, and your commitment this afternoon. And I give the word back to Antoine.